The London fog did not merely sit upon the streets of Mayfair that February evening. It seemed to seep into the very brickwork of the Windham townhouse, bringing with it a chill that no amount of coal fire could truly banish. In her modest chamber on the third floor, away from the warmth of the principal family rooms, Lady Ada Windham stood before a tall, oval looking-glass. The mercury backing was beginning to flake at the edges, creating a halo of decay around her reflection. A fitting frame, she often thought, for a woman whose season in the sun had passed more than a decade ago. Ada did not gaze at herself with vanity, nor even with the desperate scrutiny of a debutante searching for flaws. She looked at her reflection with the quiet, clinical detachment of an archivist studying a relic. 32 years had settled upon her face. They had not been unkind years exactly, but they had been heavy. They had etched faint lines around her mouth, marks left not by laughter, but by the silence of things unsaid. Her hair, the color of dark honey in the autumn, was pulled back severely, pinned with a practicality that signaled she had no wish to draw the eye. She smoothed the skirts of her gown. It was a lavender silk, a fabric that had been turned and remade twice. It was perfectly respectable, impeccably mended, and utterly lifeless. It was the color of a bruise that was beginning to fade, the uniform of the spinster aunt. Appropriately subdued, her sister Philippa had called it earlier that week. A woman of your circumstances, Ada, should not look as though she is trying to compete with the debutantes. It would be pity-inducing. A sharp rap on the doorframe shattered the silence. "Ada! Good heavens, are you still preening?" The voice drifted up the stairwell, shrill and imperious. It was Philippa, of course, Lady Philippa Hartley, who had successfully married a lord 15 years ago and had never let anyone forget it, least of all her unmarried younger sister. "I am coming, Philippa," Ada called back, her voice soft. She took one last look at the woman in the mirror, the woman who had learned to take up as little space as possible, and extinguished the candle. Descending the grand staircase felt like stepping onto a stage where she had been cast as a background extra. In the foyer, the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the rustle of stiff taffeta. Philippa stood in the center of the hall, a monument to social success in emerald green satin. Beside her stood Ada's nieces, Rebecca and Caroline. At 18 and 17, they were visions of youth, dressed in white and pale pink, their cheeks flushed with the arrogance of those who have not yet known disappointment. "Finally," Rebecca murmured to Caroline loudly, "enough to be heard. I told Mama that Aunt Ada would likely be late. It takes a great deal of time to make invisible look presentable." Caroline giggled behind a gloved hand. "Hush, Rebecca. Perhaps she was trying to find a ribbon that doesn't look as though it belonged to grandmother." Ada reached the bottom of the stairs, her expression carefully neutral. She had built a fortress around her heart years ago, brick by brick. The casual cruelty of her nieces was merely weather-beating against the stone. It could erode her, perhaps, but it could not surprise her. "The carriage has been waiting 10 minutes, Philippa snapped, adjusting the feathers on her bonnet. She cast a critical, sweeping eye over Ada. That lavender again. Well, I suppose it cannot be helped. At least you won't clash with the drapes at Lady Hartwell's. Come along. Lord Edmund is meeting us there, and if we are late, I shall blame you entirely." The carriage ride to Berkeley Square was an exercise in endurance. The interior of the coach was upholstered in plush velvet, but the atmosphere was suffocating. Philippa spent the journey debriefing her daughters on the evening's tactical objectives, treating the upcoming dinner party not as a social gathering, but as a military campaign. "Lord Whitmore will be in attendance," Philippa lectured, smoothing a stray curl on Rebecca's forehead. "He is a baron, 40 years of age and possessed of 5,000 a year. He has been looking at you, Rebecca. Do not squander it." "But, Mama, his teeth," Rebecca whined, "and he smells faintly of boiled cabbage." "He smells of money," Philippa corrected sharply. "And you are 18. You have a few seasons, yes, but do not make the mistake of thinking time is infinite." She turned her gaze slowly, deliberately toward Ada, who was staring out the window at the passing gas lamps. "One need only look to your left to see what happens when a woman is too particular or too hesitant. Youth is a currency, girls. Spend it wisely before it devalues." Ada watched the fog swirl against the glass. She felt the sting of the comment, but she did not flinch. Arguments were futile. In the eyes of her family, and indeed in the eyes of all London society, she was a cautionary tale. She was poor Ada, the Earl's daughter who had failed. 12 years ago, she had been 20, hopeful, and perhaps a little too quiet for the boisterous marriage mart. She had waited for a connection of the mind, a spark of the soul, while other girls learned to flutter fans and feign helplessness. By 22, the proposals hadn't come. By 25, the invitations had thinned. Now, at 32, she was simply part of the furniture, useful for holding shawls, chaperoning walks, and making up the numbers at dinner. The carriage lurched to a halt before the blazing windows of Lady Hartwell's residence. Footmen in livery rushed to open the doors. As Ada stepped out into the biting wind, she took a deep breath, steeling herself. "Just get through the dinner," she told herself. "Just 3 hours of invisibility, and then you can go home to your books, lady." Hartwell's drawing room was a masterpiece of intimidation. Crystal chandeliers cast a light so brilliant it seemed to banish all shadows, exposing every flaw. The air was hot, perfumed with hothouse flowers and the heavy scent of beeswax. The room buzzed with the drone of 50 conversations, a hive of gossip and calculation. Ada accepted a glass of lemonade from a passing tray and immediately sought her natural habitat, the periphery. She found a spot near a heavy velvet curtain, half hidden by a potted palm. From here she could observe without being required to perform. She watched her sister sweep into the room, instantly commanding attention. She saw her nieces unfurl their fans, their laughter ringing out a little too loudly as they were encircled by a group of young men. It was a dance Ada knew the steps to, but had never heard the music for. "Still haunting the edges, Lady Ada?" Ada suppressed a sigh and turned to face Lady Peyton, a dowager with a tongue like a serrated knife and a memory that spanned 3 monarchies. "Lady Peyton," Ada said, dipping into a curtsy, "I find the view is often clearer from the edge." View," the old woman scoffed, leaning on her cane. "You look like a governess waiting to be dismissed. Have you truly given up? Lord Humphrey is a widower. Gout in the left leg, but a solid title. I could introduce you." "You are too kind," Ada lied. Smoothly, "but I am quite content as I am." "Contentment is the excuse of the defeated," Lady Peyton muttered, her eyes already darting away to sharper prey. "Oh, look, the prodigal Duke." The room's volume dipped, then swelled again, a distinct ripple of excitement moving through the crowd. Ada followed Lady Peyton's gaze toward the double doors. A man had just entered. He was tall, darker than the fashion usually dictated, with hair the color of midnight, and a bearing that suggested he would rather be anywhere else on earth. This was Benjamin Grey, the Duke of Thornbury. Ada had heard the rumors, of course. Who hadn't? He was 34, wealthy beyond counting, and had spent the last 3 years in the wilds of Northumberland, managing his estates and ignoring the capital. He was the holy grail of the marriage mart. From her vantage point, Ada watched him. He did not look like a prize to be won. He looked bored. A footman offered him wine. He took it without looking. A mother with a hopeful daughter in tow intercepted him. He bowed with mechanical politeness, his eyes never truly engaging with them. He looked, Ada thought with a sudden jolt of recognition, exactly how she felt, trapped in a performance he had not written. "He looks as though he's attending a funeral," Ada whispered to herself. "A funeral for his bachelorhood, if the mothers in this room have their way." Lady Peyton cackled, overhearing her. "But don't get your hopes up, girl. That one is looking for a diamond, not a pebble." Ada turned away, the comment stinging more than it should have. A pebble. Yes, that was what she was. Small, grey, and easily kicked aside. The dinner was interminable. Ada was seated as usual in the dead zone of the table, flanked by a deaf clergyman and a man who wished to discuss the varying qualities of soil in sheep farming. She ate her soup, nodded at the appropriate intervals, and allowed her mind to drift. By the time the ladies withdrew to the drawing room, leaving the gentlemen to their port, Ada felt a desperate need for air. The drawing room was stifling. The feminine chatter about ribbons, scandals, and the Duke's arrival felt like a physical weight pressing on her chest. While Philippa was busy critiquing Lady Hartwell's flower arrangements to a captive audience, Ada slipped away. She knew this house. She had been here often enough as a filler guest. She knew that down the east corridor. Past the library, there was a conservatory. She pushed open the heavy oak door and stepped inside, closing it softly behind her. The silence was instant and blissful. The air here was cooler, smelling of damp earth, ferns, and the sharp tang of citrus trees. Moonlight filtered through the glass ceiling, painting the stone floor in shades of silver and blue. Ada exhaled, her shoulders dropping 3 inches. This was real. The plants were real. The quiet was real. She walked slowly down the central aisle, trailing her fingers over the leaves of a large fern. She felt like an intruder in paradise, stealing a moment of peace before returning to purgatory. A small sound broke the stillness. Thump, flutter, chirp. Ada froze. It came from the far corner beneath a bank of windows. She moved closer, her silk skirts whispering against the stone. There on the floor lay a small brown shape. A sparrow. It must have flown into the glass, deceived by the transparency, thinking it was flying toward freedom, only to strike the invisible barrier. "Oh, you poor thing," Ada whispered, the social mask dropping completely from her face. She knelt on the cold stone, heedless of her lavender silk. Her hands, usually clasped tight in her lap, moved with instinctive grace. She reached out, her fingers hovering. The bird fluttered one wing frantically, its beak open in a silent pant of terror. "Shh, shh," she cooed, her voice dropping to a hum. "I'm not going to hurt you. Be still now." With infinite tenderness, she scooped the tiny creature into her cupped palms. It weighed nothing, a heartbeat wrapped in feathers. She brought it closer to her chest, using her body heat to warm it. She examined the wing. "Just stunned, I think," she murmured to the bird, stroking its head with the tip of her index finger. "The glass lied to you, didn't it? It looked like the sky. It looked like a way out. We all make that mistake." The bird blinked a black, bead-like eye at her, its breathing beginning to slow as it sensed safety. "You just need a moment," she said softly, a sad smile touching her lips, a genuine smile, unguarded and sweet. "You need to catch your breath before you try to fly again. It's hard to be brave when you've just hit a wall." Benjamin Grey, Duke of Thornbury, had endured exactly 45 minutes of the post-dinner conversation before he decided that if he heard one more opinion on the Corn Laws, he would likely set the curtains on fire. He had slipped away under the pretense of seeking a glass of water, but in truth he was seeking silence. He had wandered toward the back of the house, drawn by the lack of voices. He saw the glass doors of the conservatory and thought it a likely refuge. He opened the door quietly, stepping into the cool darkness. He took a breath, ready to enjoy the solitude, and then he saw her. He didn't know who she was. In the dimly lit chaos of the dinner, she had been just another blur of pastel silk in the background. But here, bathed in the moonlight, she was arrested in a tableau of absolute stillness. She was kneeling on the floor, her back partially to him, her profile illuminated by the moon. She was holding something in her hands, cradling it as if it were the crown jewels. Benjamin stopped. He should announce himself. He should cough, or step back, or leave. Propriety demanded it. But he didn't move. He watched. He watched the way her head was bowed, the curve of her neck vulnerable and graceful. He heard the soft murmur of her voice, not the shrill, affected tone of the society ladies he had endured all evening, but a low, melodic sound, rich with compassion. 1 second. He saw the tenderness in her hands. 2 seconds. He saw the lack of artifice in her posture. She wasn't posing. She was caring. 5 seconds. She turned slightly, and he saw her profile. She wasn't a classic beauty. Her nose was perhaps a touch strong, her chin determined, but the expression on her face was luminous. 8 seconds. She smiled at the creature in her hands. It was a smile of such pure, unselfish kindness that it felt like a physical blow to Benjamin's chest. He had spent months being smiled at smiles that were hungry, calculating, predatory. This woman was smiling for someone else, for a tiny, insignificant bird. 12 seconds. Benjamin felt a shift in the tectonic plates of his world. The boredom that had encased him for years cracked. He wasn't looking at a spinster in a grey dress. He was looking at the only real thing he had seen. In London, he must have exhaled or shifted his weight because the silence was broken. Ada gasped and turned her head sharply, her eyes widening as she spotted the dark figure standing by the door. She scrambled to stand, though she kept her hands cupped protectively against her chest. I beg your pardon, she stammered, the fear returning to her eyes. I didn't know anyone was here. I will leave immediately. Benjamin stepped forward into the moonlight, raising a hand. No, please, do not leave on my account. I am the intruder here. Ada recognized him then. The Duke, the man everyone wanted. And here she was, kneeling on the floor with a dirty bird, looking a fright. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Your Grace, she whispered, dipping into an awkward, swift curtsy that threatened to dislodge the bird. I was just— You have something there, Benjamin said, his voice surprisingly gentle. He moved closer, slowly, as if approaching a startled deer. May I see? Ada hesitated. Every instinct told her to run, to hide, to apologize for existing. But the bird needed warmth. She held out her hands, opening them slightly. It's a sparrow, Your Grace, she said, her voice trembling. It flew into the window. I think it was confused by the light. Benjamin looked down. The small brown bird was nestled in her palm, calm and quiet. He looked from the bird to Ada's face. Up close, he could see the grey of her eyes, intelligent and wary. He could see a smudge of dust on her cheek from the conservatory floor. He thought she was magnificent. You have a healing touch, he said softly. Most birds would have died of fright. It knows I mean it no harm, Ada said, her gaze fixing on the bird rather than the Duke. It is easy to trust when you have no other option. Benjamin felt the weight of those words. And you, he asked, surprising himself, do you trust easily? Ada looked up at him then, startled by the personal question. I find, Your Grace, that trust is a luxury not often afforded to the invisible. Invisible? Benjamin repeated, his brow furrowing. Unseen, Ada corrected, a flash of self-deprecation crossing her face. I am merely the background against which the rest of the party shines. But the sparrow— She looked back down, her face softening again. The sparrow does not care about rank or beauty. It only cares about kindness. Then the sparrow is wiser than most of the people in the drawing room, Benjamin said. For a moment silence hung between them, but it was not the heavy, awkward silence of the dinner table. It was charged, electric. Benjamin wanted to keep her talking. He wanted to know why a woman with such depth was hiding in the shadows. He wanted to know why she thought she was invisible, when to him she suddenly seemed to be the brightest light in the room. I should take him to the housekeeper," Ada said, breaking the spell. "He needs a warm box for the night." "Allow me to escort you," Benjamin offered instantly. "Oh, no," Ada said, her eyes widening in panic. It would not be proper. You are the Duke of Thornbury. Nobody. If we were seen, Benjamin interrupted, a playful glint entering his eyes. "People might accuse me of having excellent taste in company." Ada stared at him, trying to decipher if he was mocking her, but his face was open, his expression serious. "You are kind, Your Grace," she said, retreating into formality. "But I know my way. Please, return to the party. They will be missing you." She curtsied again, more gracefully this time, and hurried past him toward the servants' entrance, clutching the sparrow to her heart. Benjamin stood alone in the moonlight for a long moment, watching the space where she had been. He could still smell the faint scent of lavender. Soap she left in her wake. "Nobody," he murmured to himself, testing the word she had used. He smiled, a slow, determined smile that would have terrified Philippa Hartley had she seen it. "On the contrary, Lady Ada," he whispered to the empty room, "I believe you are somebody very important indeed." He turned and walked back toward the drawing. A room. The boredom was gone. The hunt had begun. But he wasn't hunting for a trophy. He was hunting for the woman who had held a sparrow and taught him in 12 seconds what it meant to be real. The morning light filtering into the library of Thornbury House on Park Lane was crisp and unforgiving, much like the mood of its owner. Benjamin Gray sat behind a desk large enough to serve as a dining table for a family of 6, staring at a stack of correspondence that required his urgent attention. There were reports on crop yields from his northern estates, petitions from tenant farmers, and no fewer than 12 invitations to balls, soirees, and musical evenings, all written on scented paper. That made his nose itch. He pushed the pile away with a groan of frustration, leaning back in his leather chair. He picked up a quill, twirled it, and stared out the window at the bustling London street. He saw none of it. Instead, he saw a patch of moonlight on a stone floor, a trembling pair of hands, and a small brown bird. "You look like a man who has either lost a fortune or found a religion," a voice drawled from the doorway. Benjamin didn't turn. "Good morning, Thomas. I see you've decided to invade my sanctuary before noon. To what do I owe the pleasure?" Thomas Ashford, Viscount Ashford, strolled into the room with the easy grace of a man who had never known a day of true worry in his life. He was Benjamin's oldest friend, the only person in London who dared to speak to the Duke of Thornbury without filtering his thoughts through 3 layers of deference. "I came to ensure you hadn't fled back to Northumberland in the middle of the night," Thomas said, pouring himself a brandy from the sideboard despite the early hour. "You disappeared from Lady Hartwell's rather abruptly last night. Lady Peyton is convinced you climbed out a window to avoid her daughter." "The thought crossed my mind," Benjamin admitted, a dry smile touching his lips. "But no, I found something unexpected." Thomas sat in the wing-back chair opposite the desk, his expression sharpening. "Unexpected? In a Mayfair drawing-room? Surely not. Unless the punch was spiked with gin, nothing unexpected ever happens at Lady Hartwell's." Benjamin remained silent for a long moment. He respected Thomas, but he was wary of exposing the fragile discovery of the previous night to the cynicism of their world. Yet he needed a confidant. "I met a woman," Benjamin said quietly. Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Congratulations. You met a woman at a party designed specifically for you to meet women. Was it the unexpected beauty of the debutante from Sussex?" Or perhaps the heiress with the unfortunate laugh? It was Lady Ada Windham. Thomas froze, his glass halfway to his mouth. He blinked. Once, twice. Ada Windham? The Earl of Windham's spinster sister. Surely you mean one of her nieces. The Hartley girls are quite spirited. I mean Ada, Benjamin said, his voice firming, and do not call her a spinster in that tone, Thomas. It is unbecoming. Thomas set his glass down slowly. My apologies. But Benjamin, Ada Windham, she has been part of the wallpaper for a decade. I'm not sure I've ever heard her speak more than 3 words, and those were likely, "Excuse me" and "Thank you." What on earth happened? Benjamin stood and walked to the window, clasping his hands behind his back. I found her in the conservatory. She was nursing an injured bird. She didn't know I was there, and for a few moments, I saw her, truly saw her. She has a kindness, Thomas, a lack of artifice that is completely disarming. We spoke. She is intelligent, thoughtful, and painfully aware of how society views her. She's 32, Benjamin, Thomas pointed out gently, and she is considered a failure by the very people who are supposed to love her. Her. Sister Philippa is a viper. I gathered as much, Benjamin replied, his jaw tightening. Ada spoke of being invisible. She believes she has no value because she didn't secure a husband at 20. It infuriated me. Be careful, Thomas warned, his tone losing its levity. I know you. You have a savior complex the size of your estate. You spent 3 years in the north fixing broken cottages and drainage systems. You cannot fix Ada Windham. If you pay her attention out of pity, you will destroy her. Society will mock her for aiming too high, and when you inevitably lose interest, she will be left worse off than before. Benjamin turned, his eyes blazing with a sudden intensity. Pity. You think this is pity? Thomas, I have spent the last month being paraded before the most beautiful, eligible women in England. They are perfect, they are polished, and they are utterly hollow. Talking to them is like eating spun sugar, sweet, dissolving into nothing. Talking to Ada was like drinking water after a long drought. It wasn't pity. It was relief, interest, attraction. Thomas stared at him, stunned. Attraction? To Ada Windham? She has eyes the colour of a storm cloud, Benjamin said, his voice softening, and a smile that could stop a war if she ever let anyone see it. Thomas let out a long, low whistle. Well, you are serious. This is going to be a disaster. Why? Because the world makes sense when dukes marry debutantes, Thomas explained. When the Duke of Thornbury pursues the invisible spinster, the world tilts. People get dizzy. Philippa Hartley will likely have an apoplexy. And Ada, she won't believe you. She will think you are mocking her. Then I shall have to be very convincing, Benjamin said. Returning to his desk, he pulled a fresh sheet of heavy cream-coloured paper toward him. What are you doing? Thomas asked. I am writing to the Earl of Windham, Benjamin said, dipping his pen into the inkwell, to request a formal audience regarding his daughter. You're skipping the morning call. You're going straight to the father. I have no time for games, Thomas, and I suspect Ada has had enough of uncertainty. I intend to court her, properly, publicly, and relentlessly. Across town, in the morning room of the Windham townhouse, the atmosphere was considerably less charged with romantic determination. It was grey, quiet, and suffocating. Ada sat by the window, a hoop of embroidery in her lap. She had made 3 stitches in the last hour. Her mind was entirely elsewhere, replaying for the 100th time the 12 seconds in the conservatory. He spoke to me, she thought, her heart doing a treacherous little flip. He looked at me, but then the cold water of reality washed over her. He was a duke. He was polite. He had stumbled upon a woman on the floor with a dirty bird, and his breeding compelled him to be kind. That was all. To imagine anything else was madness. It was the sort of delusional thinking that led to heartbreak, the kind Philippa warned her about constantly. He probably told his friends about the eccentric woman in the conservatory. She scolded herself silently. They are probably laughing about it over breakfast right now. The thought made her cheeks burn with shame. She picked up her needle, determined to focus on the silk rose taking shape under her fingers. Forget it, Ada. Put it away in the box where you keep all your foolish hopes. There you are. The door swung open, and Philippa swept in. She was wearing a morning gown of amber silk that rustled aggressively. Her expression was pinched, her eyes scanning the room as if searching for dust or disappointment. "Good morning, Philippa," Ada said, keeping her eyes on her work. "Is it?" Philippa sniffed, sitting on the divan opposite her. "I have a headache. The champagne at Lady Hartwell's was inferior, and Rebecca is sulking because Lord Whitmore danced twice with that horse-faced girl from Surrey." "I am sorry to hear that," Ada murmured. Philippa narrowed her eyes. "You disappeared last night, Ada. Lady Peyton asked where you were. It is embarrassing to have to make excuses for a grown woman who cannot stay in a room for 3 hours without vanishing. I needed some air," Ada said, her voice steady though her pulse quickened. "I went to the conservatory for a moment." "The conservatory?" Philippa's eyes sharpened. "Alone?" "Yes." "And did you see anyone?" Ada hesitated. If she told Philippa about the Duke, the mockery would be unbearable. "The Duke spoke to you?" "Oh, Ada, don't be absurd." "I saw the plants," Ada equivocated. "And a bird." "A bird," Philippa repeated flatly. "Wonderful. My daughters are securing their futures, and my sister is communing with wildlife. You really are hopeless, Ada. I hope you didn't touch anything. You know how dirt clings to that grey dress. It makes you look even more like a dowager." Ada flinched inwardly but kept sewing. "I will be more careful next time." "See that you are. We have the Ashford ball coming up. I need you to be useful, Ada. Keep the boars away from Caroline. Don't wander off. And for heaven's sake, try to look a little less tragic. It dampens the mood." Philippa stood to leave, having dispensed her daily dose of poison, when the door opened again. The butler, Sprinkles, entered carrying a silver salver. On it sat a parcel wrapped in brown paper and a letter. "For you, my lady," Sprinkles said, bowing toward Ada. Philippa stopped in her tracks. "For me?" "No, madam. For Lady Ada." Silence descended on the room. It was a thick, heavy silence. Ada stared at the tray. No one sent her parcels, no one sent her letters, save for the occasional correspondence from an old governess. "For Ada?" Philippa laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "You must be mistaken, Sprinkles. Who would be sending urgent parcels to Ada? The messenger said it was from Thornbury House." "Madame." The air left the room. Philippa's jaw actually dropped. Ada felt the blood drain from her face, leaving her lightheaded. "Thornbury House?" Philippa whispered. "The Duke?" Ada reached out with trembling hands and took the parcel. It was heavy. She placed the letter in her lap and carefully untied the string. Her fingers felt clumsy, numb. She peeled back the paper. Inside was a book. It was bound in rich green leather with gold tooling on the spine. British Birds, a history and guide. It was an exquisite edition, the kind that cost more than Ada's entire yearly allowance. She opened the cover. The plates were hand-colored, vibrant and alive. "A book?" Philippa scoffed, recovering. "Slightly. He sent you a book? How odd. Perhaps he mistook you for a librarian." Ada ignored her. She picked up the letter. The seal was unbroken, the crest of the Duke of Thornbury pressed into red wax. She broke it. "My dear Lady Ada, I found myself thinking of our conversation in the conservatory this morning. I returned to the glass doors. Shortly after sunrise, do not fear I did not wake the household to check upon your patient. I am pleased to report that the sparrow has departed. The box was empty, and the gardener reported seeing a small brown bird flying vigorously toward the trees in the square. It seems your diagnosis was correct. It merely needed warmth, rest, and a gentle... And to find its courage again. I passed a bookseller on Bond Street and saw this volume in the window. I recalled your appreciation for the overlooked beauty of such creatures and thought you might enjoy the plates, particularly the illustration on page 42. I have written to your father this morning to request permission to call upon you tomorrow. I hope you will not find my presence an intrusion. Yours sincerely, Thornbury. Ada read the letter 3 times. The words swam before her eyes. He checked on the bird. He bought her a book. He was coming to call. "Well," Philippa demanded, her patience snapping. "What does it say? Is it an apology? Did you offend him last night?" Ada looked up, for the first time in years, the grey fog in her eyes seemed to clear, replaced by a spark of something dangerously like hope. "He says the sparrow flew away," Ada said softly, "and he asks if he might call upon me tomorrow." Philippa stared at her. "Call upon you, the Duke of Thornbury, here?" "Yes." "Don't be ridiculous," Philippa snapped, though her voice lacked its usual certainty. "He's mocking you, or he wants to ask you about charity work, or perhaps he wants to get close to Rebecca and is using you as a shield. Yes, that must be it. He knows you are the chaperone." Ada touched the leather cover of the book. She turned to page 42. There, painted in exquisite detail, was a common house. Sparrow, its feathers rendered in shades of russet and brown, looking noble and proud. "Perhaps," Ada said, closing the book gently. "But he is coming to see me, Philippa." The following afternoon, the Windham townhouse was in a state of high hysteria. Philippa had ordered the drawing-room cleaned twice. She had forced Rebecca and Caroline to change their dresses 3 times. She had positioned herself on the best sofa, looking regal and expectant. Ada had spent the morning in a state of nausea. She had almost refused to come down. "It is a mistake," she told herself. "He is coming to clarify a misunderstanding. He is coming to ask about Rebecca." But the book lay on her bedside table, a tangible weight of evidence against her fears. At 3 o'clock precisely, the heavy brass knocker sounded. Moments later, the butler announced, "His Grace, the Duke of Thornbury." Benjamin walked into the room. He brought with him the scent of fresh air and expensive tobacco. He was dressed immaculately, but he held a small, simple posy of daffodils in his hand. Philippa rose immediately, her smile dazzling. "Your Grace, what an unexpected honor! We are delighted." Benjamin bowed to her briefly, polite but dismissive. "Lady Philippa." He nodded to the nieces. "Ladies." Then he turned. He walked past the rustling silks of the Hartley women, straight to the corner where Ada sat, dressed in her best pale blue day dress, a colour she hadn't worn in years. "Lady Ada," Benjamin said, his voice dropping to that warm, intimate register she remembered from the dark conservatory. Ada stood, her knees shaking. "Your Grace." "These are for you," he said, holding out the daffodils. "I saw them in the park, and they reminded me of resilience. They are the first to bloom after the winter, are they not?" Ada took the flowers. Their bright yellow heads were cheerful, unpretentious, and utterly lovely. "Thank you," she whispered. "They are beautiful. Did you receive the book?" "I did. It was too generous." "Not at all." Benjamin smiled, and this time he let the smile reach his eyes. "I intend to be very generous with my attention, Lady Ada, if you will allow it." From across the room, Philippa made a choking sound. Benjamin ignored it. "Your father has granted me permission to take you for a drive in the park tomorrow. The fresh air would be beneficial, I think. Would you do me the honor?" The room held its breath. This was it. The public declaration. A drive in the park was not a secret meeting in a conservatory. It was a parade. It was a statement to the ton. Ada looked at the daffodils. She looked at her sister's shocked face. And then she looked at Benjamin, who was waiting, patient and steady, as if he had all the time in the world. The glass lied to you, she had told the bird. You think you can't fly. I would be honored, Your Grace, Ada said, her voice clear. Benjamin's smile widened. Benjamin, he corrected softly, so only she could hear. When we are not being announced by butlers, please call me Benjamin. Later that evening, after the Duke had departed and Philippa had retired to her room with a migraine brought on by sheer confusion, Ada sat in the library with her father. The Earl of Windham was an older man, worn down by gout and the relentless energy of his eldest daughter. He sat in his armchair, studying Ada over the rim of his spectacles. He seems serious, Ada, the Earl said gruffly. It seems impossible, Papa, Ada replied, staring into the fire. Why? The Earl asked. You are a Windham. You are educated. You are not unpleasant to look at. Ada smiled wryly. High praise, Papa. The Earl sighed, shifting his bad leg. I failed you, Ada. I let Philippa convince you that you were finished before you had even begun. I let you fade because it was quieter that... I am sorry. Ada looked at her father, surprised. He was not a man given to apologies. The Duke sat in this chair this morning, the Earl continued. He told me that he finds the women of London to be decorative shells. He told me that you have a quiet integrity that he finds captivating. He didn't ask about your dowry. He asked about your mind. Ada felt tears prick her eyes. I'm afraid, she admitted. I'm afraid he will wake up one morning and realize I'm just Ada. Then he would be a fool, the Earl grunted. And I do not think the Duke of Thornbury is a fool. But be warned, child, Philippa is bruised, society is vicious. If you step out of the shadows with him, they will try to drag you back in. You must be stronger than you have been for the last 12 years. Ada thought of the sparrow flying toward the trees. She thought of the daffodils on her nightstand. She thought of Benjamin's hand brushing hers as he left. I think, Ada said slowly, watching the flames dance, that I am tired of the shadows, Papa. I don't think I'm ready to be seen. The Earl nodded, closing his eyes. Good, because tomorrow all of London will be watching. Upstairs, Ada prepared for bed. She placed the book of birds next to her pillow. She looked in the mirror again. The glass was the same, the room was the same, but the reflection seemed different. The woman looking back was terrified, yes, but there was color in her cheeks, and for the first time in a decade, she didn't blow out the candle immediately. She let it burn, enjoying the light. The following afternoon, the sun over Hyde Park was bright, brittle, and entirely unhelpful for a woman wishing to remain unnoticed. It was the fashionable hour, that precise window of time between 4 and 5 o'clock, when the aristocracy of London descended upon the park, not to enjoy nature, but to see and be seen. To appear in the park at this hour was a statement. To appear in the park in the open barouche of a duke was a declaration of war. Ada stood in the hallway of the Windham townhouse, her gloved hands trembling slightly as she clasped her reticule. She was wearing a new pelisse, or rather an old one, that her maid, Jenny, had miraculously revived with new velvet ribbons in a shade of soft azure. It matched her eyes, Jenny had insisted. To Ada, it felt like a costume. Stand up straight, Philippa hissed from the doorway of the drawing room. She was not accompanying them. The Duke had been specific in his invitation, a breach of etiquette that was only permissible because of his boundless rank and Ada's advanced age of 32. And for heaven's sake, Ada, do not gape at the horses. Try to look as though you have sat in a ducal carriage before. I haven't, Ada pointed out dryly. Then, pretend. Acting is all we have, Philippa snapped, though her eyes were anxious. She smoothed the skirts of her own gown, clearly agitated that she was not the one being paraded. Remember, he is likely doing this to win a wager. Do not let yourself be humiliated when the bill comes due." Before Ada could respond to this parting shot, the footman opened the front door. Benjamin was waiting at the bottom of the steps. He looked up as she emerged, shielding his eyes against the sun. When he saw her, his expression shifted from polite anticipation to genuine warmth. He ascended the steps to meet her, ignoring the footman. "Lady Ada," he said, offering his arm. "You look lovely. That shade of blue reminds me of the sky over Northumberland in the spring." "You are determined to turn my head with flattery, Your Grace," Ada said, allowing him to lead her down the steps. "I am determined to speak the truth," Benjamin corrected as he handed her into the carriage. "If the truth happens to be flattering, that is hardly my fault." As the carriage lurched forward and joined the stream of traffic heading toward the park, Ada felt a wave of nausea. She gripped the leather seat. "You are trembling," Benjamin observed quietly. "I am terrified," Ada admitted. She decided then that honesty was her only defense. She could not outflirt the debutantes or out-scheme the mothers, but she could be real. "Do you realize what will happen when we enter the park? They will stare, they will whisper, they will say, 'Look at the Duke of Thornbury with poor Ada Windham. Has he lost his mind?'" Benjamin shifted, angling his body so that he blocked her view of the street, creating a small, private world within the open carriage. "Let them stare," he said, his voice hard with a protective edge she hadn't heard before. "Let them wonder. Ada, look at me." She met his gaze. His brown eyes were steady, anchoring her. "I spent 3 years in the north because I could not bear the noise of this city," he told her. "The emptiness of it, the endless parade of people pretending to be something they are not. When I look at you, I see the only person who isn't pretending. If they whisper, it is because they are confused by authenticity. It frightens them." "It frightens me too," she whispered. "Then hold my hand," he said. He placed his gloved hand over hers on the seat. It was a breach of propriety, visible to anyone who looked closely, but he didn't care. "I will not let the wolves bite." They entered the Stanhope Gate. The park was a sea of carriages, horses, and pedestrians. As the Thornbury crest on the carriage door was recognized, heads turned. Lorgnettes were raised, fans snapped shut. The hum of conversation seemed to pause, then redouble in volume. Ada felt the weight of hundreds of eyes. She saw Lady Jersey in her yellow carriage, jaw slack. She saw Lord Alverstock, a notorious gossip, actually stop his horse to stare. But then she felt the warmth of Benjamin's hand. She looked at him, and he was smiling at her, just her, ignoring the spectacle completely. "Tell me," he said, pointing to a pair of mallards landing on the Serpentine. "Do those ducks migrate, or do they brave the London winter?" Ada blinked, startled by the mundane question. They stay, mostly. The city keeps the water warm enough." "Brave creatures," Benjamin mused. "Staying in London takes a constitution of iron." Ada laughed. It was a small, startled sound, but it broke the tension. "You are absurd, Your Grace." "Benjamin," he reminded her. "Benjamin," she tested the name. It felt illicit and wonderful. For the next hour they drove. Benjamin kept up a steady stream of conversation about birds, architecture, and his estates, forcing Ada to engage, to think, to argue. Slowly, the wall of staring faces faded into a blurred background. She stopped hunching her shoulders. She pointed out a kestrel hovering over the trees. She explained the difference between a Gothic arch and a Romanesque one. By the time they returned to Cavendish Square, Ada felt exhausted, but exhilaratingly alive. She had survived the lion's den, and she hadn't been eaten. She had been protected. 2 days later, Benjamin sat in his club with Thomas Ashford. The room was thick with cigar smoke and the murmur of politics, but the only topic anyone wanted to discuss was the Duke and the Spinster. "You have created a frenzy," Thomas said, swirling his brandy. "I heard 2 bets placed this morning. One is that you are paying off a debt to her father. The other is that you have suffered a head injury." "They have little imagination," Benjamin said, unbothered. "Philippa Hartley is planning an ambush," Thomas warned. "She is hosting a small gathering tomorrow evening. Cards and conversation. She has invited you. The assumption is that you will decline, as the Hartleys are. Well beneath the dignity of Thornbury." "I accepted the invitation an hour ago," Benjamin said. Thomas choked on his drink. "You what?" "Benjamin, Philippa will stack the deck. She will have Rebecca playing the pianoforte, Caroline reciting poetry, and she will likely seat Ada behind a potted plant. It is enemy territory." "Exactly," Benjamin said, his eyes gleaming. "I cannot court Ada only in the safety of my carriage or the park. I need to show her and her family that I value her in her own world. I need to walk into the lion's den and choose her, specifically and publicly, over everyone else." "You are enjoying this," Thomas accused. "I am enjoying the fact that for the first time in my life I know exactly what I want," Benjamin replied, "and I am going to get her." The Hartley residence on Berkeley Street was lit like a beacon. Philippa had clearly decided that if the Duke was coming, the house would be visible from space. Inside, the drawing room was crowded. Philippa had stretched the definition of small gathering to include every eligible bachelor and influential matron she could summon on short notice. When Benjamin was announced, the room went silent. He walked in, looking devastating in formal evening wear. Philippa surged forward, flanked by Rebecca and Caroline, who were dressed in matching shades of peach that made them look like expensive confectionery. "Your Grace," Philippa trilled, "we are so honored. Please come meet Lord and Lady Weatherby, and Rebecca has been dying to play her new sonata for you." Benjamin bowed politely. "Lady Philippa, you are too kind. However, I do not see your sister." Philippa's smile faltered just for a fraction of a second. "Oh, Ada is here somewhere. I believe she is. Helping the dowagers with their tea. She is so dutiful. But come, Rebecca is waiting." "I am sure Lady Rebecca plays beautifully," Benjamin said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the room. "But I confess I came with a specific purpose. I promised Lady Ada a rematch." "A rematch?" Philippa blinked. "At whist," Benjamin lied smoothly. "We discussed strategy during our drive, and I am eager to test her skill." He stepped around the wall of peach silk and scanned the room. He found Ada in the far corner, practically blending into the velvet drapes. She was holding a plate of biscuits, listening to a deaf aunt complain about the draft. When their eyes met, the relief on her face was so profound, it nearly broke his heart. He walked straight to her, the crowd parting like the Red Sea. "Lady Ada," he said, bowing low, "I believe you promised me a game." Ada looked at him, wide-eyed. I did." "You did," he said, offering his arm. "And I never let a lady break a promise." He led her to the central card table, which had clearly been intended for the highest-ranking guests. He pulled out a chair for her. "Philippa," Benjamin called out, "Lady Ada and I require 2 opponents. Perhaps you and Lord Edmund would do us the honour." Philippa looked as though she had swallowed a lemon whole. To refuse the Duke was impossible. To play against him, partnered with her husband, while Ada sat in the seat of honour, was a humiliation. But she sat. The room settled into a hushed observation. This was not just a card game, it was theatre. As the cards were dealt, Benjamin leaned slightly toward Ada. "Breathe," he murmured. "It is just cards. You are intelligent, you observe everything. You will be excellent at this." "I haven't played whist in years," Ada whispered back, her fingers fumbling with her fan. "Philippa says I have no head for strategy." "Philippa says many things," Benjamin replied, arranging his hand. "Most of them are wrong. Look at your cards, Ada. Trust your instincts." The game began. At first, Ada was stiff, terrified of making a mistake that would prove her sister right. But Benjamin was a calm, steady presence. He didn't dominate the game, he facilitated her. When she made a clever play, he praised her with a nod. When she hesitated, he waited patiently, his eyes encouraging. Slowly, the fog of fear lifted. Ada realized she did remember the game. She remembered that Edmund always led with his strongest suit, and Philippa always held back her trumps too long, greedy for a dramatic finish. "I believe," Ada said quietly, placing a card on the table, "that the trick is ours, partner." Philippa stared at the card. It was the King of Spades, effectively capturing Philippa's queen. "Well played," Benjamin said, his voice rich with satisfaction. "Excellently played." The game continued for an hour. With every hand, the dynamic in the room shifted. Ada Windham, the invisible spinster, was laughing. She was strategizing. She was beating her brother-in-law, and she was doing it with a duke smiling at her as if she were the only woman in the world. During a break in the play, while the deck was being shuffled, the room's noise rose again. Under the cover of the chatter, Ada looked at Benjamin. "You are doing this on purpose," she murmured. "Winning, I admit, I am competitive. No, this." She gestured to the table, the room, the way he was looking at her. "You are making a point. Is it a bad point?" "It is a dangerous Ada said, her voice trembling slightly. "You are raising me up, Benjamin. If you let me fall, the drop will destroy me." Benjamin stopped shuffling. He placed the cards down and looked at her, his expression stripping away all the social pleasantries. "I am not playing a game, Ada," he said, low and fierce. "I am not moving pieces on a board. I'm showing you and them where you belong. I'm not going to let you fall. I'm trying to build a foundation where we can stand together. Do you trust me?" Ada looked at him. She saw the stubborn set of his jaw, the warmth in his eyes. She thought of the sparrow. She thought of the drive in the park. "I am trying," she whispered. "Good. That is all I ask." He picked up his hand. "Now, let us finish them. I believe you have the ace of hearts." They won the rubber. The victory was decisive. As they stood up, the applause from the room was polite, but the whispers were frantic. The narrative had changed. It was no longer, "Poor Ada." It was, "Did you see how he looked at her?" Philippa stood, her face a mask of forced gaiety. "Well, beginner's luck, I suppose. Ada, you look tired. Perhaps you should retire." "On the contrary," Benjamin interjected, offering Ada his arm again. "Lady Ada has promised to show me the portrait of your grandfather in the hallway. I have a sudden interest in art history." He led her away from the table, away from Philippa's toxicity and toward the relative privacy of the corridor. "There is no portrait of my grandfather," Ada whispered as they walked. "I know," Benjamin grinned. "But I needed 5 minutes alone with you before I leave, and I didn't think you wanted to discuss sheep farming with Lord Edmund." They stopped near an alcove. The sounds of the party drifted out, muted and distant. Benjamin turned to her, taking both her gloved hands in his. "You were magnificent tonight," he said. "I was terrified," she countered. "Bravery is not the absence of fear, Ada. It is playing the King of Spades when your hand is shaking." He raised her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles, first the left, then the right. The intimacy of the gesture was shocking, electric. Ada felt a flush rise from her neck to her hairline. "I must go," he said, lowering her hands but not releasing them. "But I will call on you tomorrow, and the day after, and every day until you stop looking at me as if I am going to vanish." "Why?" Ada asked, the question escaping her before she could stop it. "Why me, Benjamin, really?" He looked at her, his expression sober. "Because, Ada, in a room full of people shouting to be heard, you are the only one worth listening to." He squeezed her hands one last time and turned to leave. Ada watched him go, leaning against the wall for support. Her heart was hammering a rhythm against her ribs that felt suspiciously like a new song. Inside the drawing room, the gossip was reaching a fever pitch. Philippa was frantically explaining to Lady Jersey that the Duke was merely being kind to the family. But no one was listening to Philippa anymore. They were all talking about Ada, and for the first time in 12 years, Ada Windham didn't want to hide. She straightened her spine, smoothed her azure dress, and walked back into the room, not to the corner, but to the centre, to say good-night to her father. She was no longer invisible. She was the woman the Duke had chosen, and she held the Ace of Hearts. April arrived in London not with a whisper, but with a riot of colour, mirroring the quiet revolution taking place within the walls of the Windham townhouse. The courtship of Lady Ada Windham by the Duke of Thornbury had ceased to be the scandal of the week and had settled into something far more formidable, a fact. It was a campaign of consistency. Benjamin did not overwhelm Ada with grand, hollow gestures. Instead, he eroded her defences with the relentless application of his presence. He called every afternoon. He sent books, poetry, natural history, essays on political reform. He took her to places that society found dreadfully dull, but which they both found fascinating. One Tuesday they visited the British Museum. While other couples might have strolled through the park to be seen, Benjamin and Ada stood before the Elgin marbles, debating the nature of permanence. "It is tragic, is it not?" Ada remarked, tilting her head to study the headless torso of a river god. "To be so magnificent, yet broken, to have lost the very face that gave you identity." "I disagree," Benjamin said, standing close enough that the sleeve of his coat brushed her arm. "The identity remains in the posture. Look at the strength of the reclining figure. It does not need a face to command the room. It simply is. History has stripped away the decoration, Ada, leaving only the truth." He turned to look at her, his eyes intense. "I prefer the truth to the decoration, in art and in people." Ada felt the familiar warmth rise in her cheeks, but she didn't look away as she once would have. "You find metaphors in everything, Benjamin." "I find you in everything," he corrected softly. This was the nature of their days. Slowly, the invisible woman began to take on substance. It started with her voice. She spoke more often. Her opinions no longer whispered apologies, but stated thoughts. Then, her posture. She stopped hunching, as if trying to fold herself into nothingness. Finally, her wardrobe. The drab greys and faded lavenders were retired to the back of the wardrobe, with the encouragement of her father, who had suddenly become very generous. With her allowance and the sheer force of her own awakening, Ada began to dress in colours that celebrated her existence rather than apologized for it. Soft blues that matched her eyes, rich creams that warmed her complexion, even a daring shade of sage green that made her hair gleam like spun gold. Not everyone celebrated this metamorphosis. Lady Sut. Philippa Hartley watched her sisters blooming with a mixture of confusion and curdling jealousy. For 15 years, the hierarchy of the family had been absolute. Philippa was the beauty, the success, the matriarch. Ada was the failure, the burden, the shadow. Benjamin's attention had upended the natural order of the universe. The breaking point arrived 3 days before the Duchess of Ashford's ball, the pinnacle of the social season. Ada was in her bedchamber, standing on a stool while the dressmaker pinned the hem of her new gown. It was a creation of silver silk overlaid with gossamer tulle, embroidered with tiny pearls that caught the light like trapped stars. It was not a dress for a spinster. It was a dress for a future duchess. Philippa swept into the room without knocking, stopped dead, and stared. "What is this?" she demanded, pointing a trembling finger at the gown. "My dress for the Ashford ball," Ada said calmly, looking at her sister through the reflection in the cheval mirror. "It is inappropriate," Philippa snapped, her face flushing. "Silver? Pearls? Ada, you are 32, not 20. You look like mutton dressed as lamb. You will be a laughing-stock. Where is the mauve crepe you wore to the opera? That was far more suitable." The dressmaker, a woman named Madame Rousseau, looked terrified, clutching a mouthful of pins. "You may leave us for a moment, madame," Ada said gently. The dressmaker fled. Ada stepped down from the stool. She felt the rustle of the expensive silk around her legs, a sound like a whisper of armor. "I am not wearing the mauve, Philippa," Ada said. Her voice was low, but it lacked the tremor that usually accompanied confrontations with her sister. "You are making a fool of yourself," Philippa hissed, closing the distance between them. "Do you truly believe this charade will last? The Duke is amusing himself. He is playing a game, and when he grows bored, and he will grow bored, you will be left with nothing but these ridiculous dresses and a broken heart. I'm trying to protect you, Ada. When he leaves, you will have to go back to being you." "And who is me, Philippa?" Ada asked. "The invisible woman? The cautionary tale you tell your daughters?" "The woman who knows her place," Philippa shouted. "You are safe in the shadows, Ada. Out here in the light, you are just a target." Ada looked at her sister. For the first time, she didn't see a monster. She saw a terrified, aging beauty who had built her entire self-worth on being better than someone else. If Ada rose, Philippa fell. "I am not safe in the shadows," Ada said quietly. "I am lonely there, and I am tired of being lonely." She took a step forward, the silver silk flowing around her. "Benjamin does not see a target. He sees me. And for the first time in my life, I like what I see in the mirror. I am going to the ball, Philippa. I am wearing this dress, and I am going to dance with the man who loves me." Philippa stared at her, her mouth opening and closing. The sheer audacity of the word love hung in the air. "Love?" Philippa whispered, as if it were a foreign obscenity. "You are a fool." She turned and fled the room, slamming the door. Ada stood alone in the silence. Her hands were shaking, but she did not cry. She turned back to the mirror, smoothed the silver silk over her hips, and lifted her chin. "No," she told her reflection, "I am finally awake." The night of Lady Ashford's ball was unseasonably warm, the air thick with the scent of blooming jasmine and the nervous energy of 500 aristocrats. The Ashfords' ballroom was a cavern of gold leaf and candlelight, a dazzling arena where reputations were made and destroyed between the first and second quadrille. The Windham carriage arrived late, a strategic decision by the Earl, who seemed to be enjoying his daughter's sudden notoriety with mischievous glee. As Ada stepped out of the carriage, she gripped her father's arm. "I cannot breathe, Papa," she whispered. "Nonsense," the Earl patted her hand. "It is just the stays, or perhaps the weight of being the most interesting person in London. Chin up, Ada, the Duke is waiting." They ascended the grand staircase. The footman at the top banged his staff. The Earl of Windham, Lady Philippa Hartley, Lord Edmund Hartley, the Mrs. Hartley, and Lady Ada Windham. The announcement rippled through the room. Heads turned. Conversations died. It was the parting of the Red Sea all over again, but this time the curiosity was mixed with something else. Awe. Ada appeared at the top of the stairs. The silver dress shimmered under the chandeliers, making her look ethereal, glowing. She was not the prettiest woman in the room. She did not have the dewy complexion of the debutantes, but she possessed a gravity, a serene elegance that made the younger girls look unfinished. Philippa, dressed in a somber maroon, looked like a thundercloud trailing behind a silver moon. Rebecca and Caroline, usually the stars, trailed behind their aunt, looking confused by the sudden shift in celestial mechanics. At the bottom of the stairs, standing alone in a circle of deferential space, was Benjamin. He was wearing formal black. Evening wear, the star of the garter pinned to his chest. He looked devastatingly handsome and utterly unapproachable, until he looked up and saw Ada. The transformation in his face was visible from the gallery. The boredom vanished. A smile broke across his face, that private, intimate smile that Ada had come to claim as her own. He walked to the foot of the stairs, ignoring the mothers trying to catch his eye. He stopped on the bottom step and held out his hand to Ada as she descended. "You look," he said, his voice loud enough for the nearby crowd to hear, "like starlight given form." Ada took his hand. His grip was warm, solid, real. "And you, Your Grace, look like a man who is about to cause a scandal. The best kind," he promised. He turned to the Earl. "Lord Windham, you have brought the treasure of the evening. Try not to lose her in the crush, Thornbury," the Earl winked. "She has become quite popular." "I intend," Benjamin said, placing Ada's hand on his arm, "to never let her out of my sight." They moved into the ballroom. The sensation was overwhelming. Ada felt the eyes on her, calculating, envious, curious. But with Benjamin beside her, the stares felt less like daggers and more like spotlights. "They are all looking at you," Benjamin murmured as they navigated the crowd. "They are looking at us," Ada corrected. "They are trying to figure out the riddle." "Let them puzzle over it," Benjamin said dismissively. "Lady Ashford has saved the first waltz for us. Are you ready?" Ada's heart stuttered. The first waltz. It was the premier slot, usually reserved for the highest-ranking couple or the hosts. To dance it with the Duke was a public declaration that he considered her his equal, his partner. I might step on your toes," she confessed. "Then I shall consider it an honor to be trampled by you." The orchestra struck the opening chords of a Strauss waltz. The chatter in the room evaporated. The floor cleared. Benjamin led Ada to the center of the vast, polished expanse. He turned to face her. He placed one hand on her waist, a touch that burned through the silver silk, and took her right hand in his. "Look at me, Ada," he commanded softly. "Not at Philippa, not at the crowd, just me, the man from the conservatory." She looked up. She saw the brown eyes that had watched her hold a sparrow. She saw the kindness that had sent her a book. She saw the love that she was finally brave. "Enough to name." "I see you," she whispered. They began to move. It was not a dance. It was a conversation without words. Benjamin led her with effortless grace, sweeping her through the turns. Ada, buoyed by the music and his strength, felt weightless. The silver dress flared out around them, catching the light, creating a halo that seemed to separate them from the watching world. "Do you know what today is?" Benjamin asked as they spun past the orchestra. "Tuesday?" "It is exactly 2 months since Lady Hartwell's dinner," he said. 2 months since I walked into a greenhouse and found my life." Ada's breath hitched. "It feels like a lifetime ago. That woman, she was so sad, so resigned. And this woman." Benjamin pulled her slightly closer, a breach of propriety that drew a collective gasp from the room and a thrill from Ada's heart. "How does she feel?" "She feels—" Ada searched for the word. "Seen. She feels real." "Good," Benjamin said, his voice rough with emotion. "Because I don't want a ghost, Ada. I want a wife." Ada missed a step. She stumbled just a fraction, but Benjamin's arm tightened instantly, holding her up, keeping her steady. He didn't let her fall. "Did you?" she stammered, looking at his face in shock. "Not here." He smiled, a mischievous glint in his eye. "I have a sense of occasion, and shouting my proposal over a violin section seems insufficiently romantic for you. But know this, Ada Windham, I am not dancing with you to pass the time. I am dancing with you to claim you." The music swelled to a crescendo. They spun faster, the world blurring into a smear of gold and candle flame. There was only Benjamin, his hand on her waist, his eyes on hers, his promise hanging in the air between them. When the music stopped, there was a beat of absolute silence. Then Thomas Ashford started clapping. The Earl joined in, and slowly the room followed. It was not the polite applause of society. It was the thunderous sound of a crowd acknowledging a victor. Benjamin did not let go of her hand. He bowed to her, low and reverent, then tucked her hand back onto his arm. "Come," he said, turning her away from the crowd. "I believe there is a terrace, and I find myself in desperate need of fresh air and your undivided attention." As they walked off the floor, the crowd parted. Philippa Hartley stood near a pillar, her face pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. She watched. Her sister, the sister she had mocked, belittled and dismissed, walked past her with the bearing of a queen. Ada saw her. She paused for a brief second. She didn't smirk. She didn't gloat. She simply offered Philippa a small, sad nod, a final acknowledgement of a war that was over because one side had finally realized they didn't have to fight anymore. Then she turned back to Benjamin and walked out into the cool night air. The terrace was empty, bathed in moonlight that felt like an echo of their first meeting. Benjamin led her to the stone balustrade overlooking the gardens. The noise of the ball was muffled here, replaced by the chirping of crickets. "You dazzled them," Benjamin said, leaning against the stone and watching her. "I think the dress did most of the work," Ada deflected, touching the pearls on her bodice. "The dress was merely the setting," Benjamin said. "You were the jewel." He reached out and tucked a loose strand of honey-colored hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. "Ada, I meant what I said. On the dance floor, I am done with courtship, I am done with driving in circles around the park." "Are you?" Ada whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Then what comes next?" "The truth," Benjamin said. "The rest of the truth." He took a breath, looking out at the moon, then back at her. "I have been lonely for a very long time, Ada. I have houses full of people and a life full of noise, but I have been lonely. I thought I was too particular, too difficult. Thomas told me I was looking for something that didn't exist." He took her hands, both of them, and held them against his chest. She could feel the steady, strong beat of his heart through the fine wool of his coat. "Then I saw you holding a broken thing with such reverence," he said softly, "and I realized I wasn't looking for perfection. I was looking for a safe harbor. I was looking for someone who understands that we are all a little broken and loves us anyway." Tears pricked Ada's eyes, not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming relief. "I'm not perfect, Benjamin. I'm quiet. I'm older than I should be. I have scars from years of silence. And I love every one of them," he said fiercely. "I love your quiet because it makes me listen. I love your age because it has given you wisdom. I love your scars because they mean you survived." He stepped closer, invading her. Space, filling her world. "I am going to ask you a question, Ada. Not tonight. I want to do it properly. I want to do it where it began. But I need to know, when I ask it, will the answer be the one I hope for?" Ada looked up at him. She thought of the years of invisibility. She thought of the mirror in her room. She thought of the woman who had walked into the ball tonight in a silver dress. "Benjamin," she said, her voice steady and sure, "if you asked me to fly to the moon, I would ask when we leave. My answer is already yes." Benjamin let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for weeks. He lowered his head slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. She rose on her tiptoes to meet him. His lips brushed hers, gentle, tentative, a question asked and answered in the softest of touches. It wasn't the devouring kiss of a romance novel. It was the sweet, solid seal of a promise kept. "Tomorrow," he whispered against her lips. "Tomorrow we go back to the conservatory." "Tomorrow," Ada agreed. Above them, the moon shone down, bright and indifferent to the gossip of London, illuminating two people who had found the rarest thing of all, the ability to be fully, completely seen. The morning after the ball, Benjamin did not send a calling card. He sent a carriage. Ada was waiting. She had barely slept, her mind a kaleidoscope of silver silk, waltz, music, and the memory of a kiss on a moonlit terrace. When she stepped into the Duke's barouche, she was dressed in a soft, moss-green walking dress, the color of new growth. They did not speak much during the ride. The air between them was heavy with anticipation, a comfortable electric silence that felt like the deep breath before a plunge. When the carriage halted, Ada looked out the window and smiled. They were at Lady Hartwell's residence on Berkeley Square. "She is away in Bath," Benjamin said as he helped her down, his hand lingering at her waist. "But she has given me the keys to the kingdom, or at the very least, the keys to the conservatory." He led her through the house, past the drawing room where the suffocating dinner party had taken place 2 months ago. It seemed smaller now, less imposing. The ghosts of her insecurity whispered from the corners, but they were faint, drowned out by the solid cadence of Benjamin's footsteps beside her. They reached the heavy oak door of the conservatory. Benjamin paused, his hand on the latch. "Are you ready?" he asked, looking down at her. "I have been ready for 12 years, Benjamin," she replied softly. He opened the door. The scent hit them first, earth, fern, and lemon verbena. The sunlight streamed through the glass panels, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was vibrant and alive, a stark contrast to the blue moonlight of their first meeting. Benjamin led her to the far corner, to the exact spot beneath the windows where the sparrow had fallen. "It looks different in the light," Ada observed. "Everything does," Benjamin said. He turned to face her, taking both her hands. "Ada, do you remember what I told you that night, when you said you were invisible? You said I was the only real thing in London." "I was wrong," Benjamin said, his expression serious. Ada's heart stuttered. A cold wind seemed to blow through the warm glass house. "Wrong? You aren't just real, Ada. You are essential." He released her hands and took a step back, dropping slowly, deliberately, to one knee on the stone. "Floor!" Ada gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. The gesture was so archaic, so formal, and yet coming from him it felt startlingly intimate. Benjamin reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small box covered in dark blue velvet. "I spent weeks looking for a stone," he said, opening the box. "Diamonds were too cold. Rubies were too aggressive. Sapphires were too common." Inside the box sat a ring of exquisite craftsmanship. It was gold, twisting like a vine, holding a central stone that was neither blue nor grey, but a shifting, luminous storm cloud colour. A spinel, rare and unheated. "It matches your eyes," he said softly. "Changeable, deep, and utterly unique." He looked up at her, and the vulnerability in his eyes made her want to weep. "Lady Ada Windham, you saved a sparrow with gentle hands. You saved me with a gentle heart. You have taught me that love is not about possession, but about recognition. I see you, Ada. I value you. I cannot imagine a future that does not have your voice in it. Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" The tears came then, hot and fast. Ada nodded, unable to speak, then choked out, "Yes, yes, Benjamin, 1,000 times." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. He rose and pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her neck. They stood there for a long time, holding on to each other in the quiet green sanctuary where it had all begun. "You realize," Ada whispered into his coat, "that this will cause a riot." Benjamin laughed, a deep rumble against her chest. "Let them riot. I have the Duchess I wanted." The announcement in the Morning Post the following day did not cause a riot, but it certainly caused a seismic shift in the social strata of Mayfair. His Grace, the Duke of Thornbury, is pleased to announce his engagement to Lady Ada Windham, daughter of the Earl of Windham. The reaction was immediate. Bouquets of flowers began to arrive at the Windham townhouse by the hour. People who had looked through Ada for a decade suddenly remembered that they had always found her charming and witty, but the true storm was brewing closer to home. Philippa arrived at noon. She did not wait to be announced. She stormed into the morning room where Ada was writing thank-you notes, her face a mask of fury and disbelief. "It is a trick," Philippa announced, slamming her reticule onto the table. "It has to be. He has compromised you, hasn't he? You lured him into something indiscreet, and his honor forced him to offer." Ada put down her pen. She looked at the ring on her finger, the storm cloud stone catching the light. She looked at her sister, and for the first time she felt absolutely nothing but pity. "There was no trick, Philippa," Ada said calmly. "And there was no trap. He loves me." "Loves you?" Philippa let out a shrill, hysterical laugh. "Don't be absurd, Ada. Look at you. You are a spinster. You are plain. You are dull. Men like Thornbury do not love women like you. He is mocking us. He is mocking me." Ada stood up. She moved slowly, the silk of her dress rustling. She walked until she was standing directly in front of her sister. "Philippa," she said, her voice low and steely, "you are screaming." Philippa stopped, startled by the authority in Ada's tone. "For 12 years, Ada continued, "you have told me I am nothing. You have used my failures to highlight your successes. You have taught your daughters to pity me so they might feel superior. I accepted it because I believed you. I believed I was invisible." She raised her left hand, letting the ring flash in Philippa's face. "I was wrong, and you were cruel. Not because you hate me, but because you are terrified. You played the game perfectly, Philippa. You married well, you dressed well, you followed every rule. And yet here I am. I broke every rule. I waited, I aged, I was myself, and I won the prize you thought was reserved for the perfect." Philippa's face crumbled. The anger drained away, leaving a stark, bitter jealousy. "It isn't fair," she whispered. "No," Ada agreed gently. "Love isn't fair. It isn't a reward for good behavior or a strategic alliance. It is a gift, and I intend to cherish it." She reached out and touched Philippa's arm. "I am going to be a duchess, Philippa. I will have influence and wealth and power. I can use that to help Rebecca and Caroline. I can help them find matches based on affection, not just desperation. Or I can close my doors to you. The choice is yours. But you will never speak to me like this again. Do you understand?" Philippa looked at her sister, really looked at her, and saw the stranger who had replaced the shadow. She swallowed hard, nodded once, and turned to leave. She didn't apologize. Philippa Hartley did not apologize, but she retreated, and in the war between the sisters, that was a surrender. The wedding took place on a glorious day in May at St. George's, Hanover Square. It was the event of the decade. The pews were packed with the cream of the aristocracy, everyone craning their necks to see the spinster bride. But when the organ music swelled and the doors opened, the gossip died. Ada walked down the aisle on the arm of her father. She wore cream silk, simple and elegant, with a veil of Brussels lace that had belonged to her mother. She did not look triumphant. She looked radiant. The Earl of Windham, usually a stoic man, was weeping openly. As they reached the altar, he stopped and kissed Ada's cheek. "Your mother is here," he whispered, his voice thick. "I feel her. She is." "So proud of you, Ada. You waited for the right one." He placed Ada's hand in Benjamin's. Benjamin took it. He looked at Ada as if she were the only source of light in the cavernous church. He squeezed her hand, a silent reassurance. "I am here. We are real." The vows were spoken in clear, steady voices. "I, Benjamin, take thee, Ada. I, Ada, take thee, Benjamin." When the Archbishop pronounced them man and wife, a cheer went up that was decidedly unchurchlike. Benjamin didn't wait for permission. He lifted Ada's veil, cupped her face in his hands, and kissed her with a tenderness that made ladies in the front row weep into their handkerchiefs. As they walked back down the aisle, the Duke and Duchess of Thornbury, Ada looked at the sea of faces. She saw Lady Peyton nodding approval. She saw Philippa looking subdued but respectful. She saw Thomas Ashford grinning like a madman. But mostly she saw the open door at the end of the church, filled with sunlight, leading to a life she had never dared to dream of. Epilogue 5. Years later, the willow tree at Thornbury Hall, Benjamin's estate in Northumberland, was ancient and massive. Its branches swept the ground, creating a green, living cathedral that smelled of river water and summer grass. Underneath this canopy, the Duchess of Thornbury sat on a tartan blanket, watching chaos unfold. "Elizabeth, do not eat the—" "A clover!" Ada called out, laughing. 4-year-old Elizabeth, dark-haired and fierce like her father, spat out the flower with a grimace. "It tastes like salad, Mama." "I did warn you," Ada said. Her twin brother William was busy trying to construct a fortress out of twigs near the trunk of the tree. And in Ada's arms, 6-month-old Thomas, named for the Viscount who had helped start it all, was sleeping soundly, a warm weight against her heart. Benjamin appeared through the curtain of willow leaves. He had been riding. He was in his shirt sleeves, his boots dusty, his hair wind-blown. He looked younger than he had 5 years ago, the lines of boredom and cynicism completely erased from his face. "I found them," he announced, holding up a glass jar. The twins shrieked with delight and abandoned their projects, rushing to their father. "Tadpoles!" William shouted. "Papa found the tadpoles." Benjamin knelt in the grass, showing the children the swirling dark shapes in the water. He explained the metamorphosis, how they would lose their tails and grow legs, how they would change from water creatures to land creatures. He spoke to them with the same seriousness and respect he used with adults, answering their questions with patience. Ada watched him. The love she felt was a physical ache, a fullness that seemed to expand every year. He looked up and caught her eye. He handed the jar to William with a warning to be gentle and moved to sit beside her on the blanket. "You look contemplative," he said, kissing her temple. "Is the baby sleeping?" "Finally," Ada whispered. "He has your stubbornness." "And your eyes," Benjamin countered, brushing a finger over the baby's soft cheek. He leaned back against the tree trunk, pulling Ada against his side. She rested her head on his shoulder, watching the sunlight dapple through the leaves. "I received a letter from Philippa," Ada said quietly. "Oh? Has she found a new way to be insulted by our happiness?" "No," Ada smiled. "She writes that Caroline is expecting her first child, and she signed the letter with, 'Love, your sister.' No titles, no posturing. Time mellows even the harshest stones," Benjamin mused. Or perhaps she simply realized that being miserable is exhausting. "I think," Ada said, "that she finally realized I am not her enemy." A robin landed on a low branch nearby, tilting its head to watch the family. "Look," Benjamin pointed. "A visitor." "Mama, tell the story," Elizabeth demanded, abandoning the tadpoles. "Tell the story about the bird." "You know the story," Ada laughed. "I have told it 1,000 times." "Tell it again," William pleaded. "The part about the glass." Ada looked at Benjamin. He smiled, that slow, warm smile that still made her knees weak. "Go on," he urged. "It is their heritage." Ada took a breath, pulling her children close. "Once upon a time," she began, "there was a woman who thought she was invisible. She wore grey dresses and she sat in the corners of rooms, and she thought that because people looked past her, she wasn't really there." The twins listened with rapt attention, though they knew every word. One night she went to a glass garden to be alone, and she found a tiny sparrow that had flown into a window. It had hit the glass because it thought the reflection of the sky was real. It was hurt and frightened, and it couldn't fly. "And then," Elizabeth whispered. "And then," Ada said, looking at her husband, "a man walked in a duke, but he didn't look like a duke. He looked like safety. He saw the woman holding the bird. He didn't see a spinster. He didn't see a shadow. He saw her." 12 seconds, William shouted. "Yes," Benjamin chimed in, his voice deep and rumbling. "It took exactly 12 seconds. One moment I was bored and lonely. 12 seconds later, I knew I had found the most important person in the world." "And then you married her," Elizabeth cheered. "And then we lived happily ever after," Ada finished, kissing the top of the baby's head. The children, satisfied with the recitation, ran back to the tadpoles. Benjamin took Ada's hand, interlacing their fingers. The gold ring with the storm cloud stone glinted in the sun. "Are you happy, Ada?" he asked, as he often did, as if he still couldn't quite believe their luck. Ada looked at the green canopy of the willow, the laughing children, the man who held her hand. She thought of the mirror in Mayfair, the grey dress, the long, silent years. "I am seen, Benjamin," she said simply, "and I am loved. There is no greater happiness than that." The wind rustled the willow branches, whispering secrets to the grass. Ada Windham, the Duchess of Thornbury, closed her eyes and listened to the music of her life, a symphony of joy that she had once thought she would never hear, but which now played on, loud and sweet and real. The end. Author's note to the listener. If you have listened to Ada's story and felt a pang of recognition, if you have ever felt that you are waiting in the wings of your own life, or that your time for joy has passed, let this be a reminder. We often believe the world's lies about us. We believe that if we are not young or loud or perfect, we are invisible. But invisibility is a trick of the light. It is a lie we tell ourselves to stay safe in the shadows. Ada waited 12 years. She endured ridicule and loneliness, but she kept her heart soft enough to care for a sparrow, and that softness was what called her future to her. You are not invisible. You are simply waiting to be seen by the right eyes. It does not matter if you are 30 or 50 or 80. Real love, the kind that Benjamin offered, does not look for a trophy. It looks for a soul. It looks for the person who will sit on the floor and hold the broken things. So, do not blow out the candle. Keep the light burning. Your 12 seconds may be just around the corner. Thank you for listening to the Legends of the Fall channel. If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe to help us share more tales of hope and love.